Okay, brilliant. So I think let's begin. This is already how the weeks go by so quickly. This is already the third and final talk in the three-part series discussing Ashkenazi Jewry. And I'm sure, like me, all of you have found the previous two talks really fascinating and enlightening. And I'm sure, like me, you're looking forward to this third and last talk in the series. Again, I want to take the opportunity to thank Bev so sincerely. She was just so generous with her time. She is being so generous with her time. So many people said she comes across, as I said last time, with such enthusiasm, such passion, such the smile on her face. Bev, thank you. I know this time, it's difficult there in Melbourne time, 9 hours ahead. You've got your kids there, dinner, bedtime. So thank you so much. And I mean, you've been so generous, even offering maybe future talks. Please God, we'll take you up on that. But for now, thank you for this fascinating series, and we look forward to this talk. Thank you.
It's an absolute pleasure. So, so tonight, for those of you that have been at the last two talks, I'll just stop sharing for 2 seconds so you can see me. That listened to the last two talks. The first time we were really speaking about medieval Jewry and the journey of the Jewish people to the lands of Ashkenaz, the lands between the Rhone and the Rhine, in Germany and France. And then last week we spoke about the shift east, the journeys eastward towards Poland and towards Lithuania. And this week we're going to talk about the shift west. So where Jews went after that period of time. Of course, there were still Jews living in Eastern Europe, so it's not all a shift west. We know that in the Holocaust, 3 million Jews were killed just from Poland alone. So there were many Jews still living in the east that hadn't managed to move over to the west by the time the Shoah came along. But tonight we're going to talk really. The last few weeks I've been speaking really about 800 years. And I've squashed 800 years into a 1 hour talk. But tonight I have to squish in 200 years. And the thing is, as time goes by, there's more to talk about. So more things happen as we get into the present time. And of course, we know more because history is recorded. So, so squishing in 200 years is actually much more complicated, believe it or not, than squishing in 800 years. So I'm going to try and I'm really touching on subjects here, like literally almost each one of these slides, or at least each one of these slides is at least an hour talk. But I'm going to like just compress everything, summarize everything, and hopefully you'll get a good idea of the big picture, and then you can, it gives you opportunity to look up information on each particular area if you're interested in it. So I'm just going to share the screen here. All right, so we're talking about the journeys west. So why would Jews have decided to move back west to the lands of Ashkenaz when things were actually so bad there initially? Germany was terrible, France was terrible, Jews were expelled. Jews were expelled from Spain, Jews were expelled from France, Jews were expelled from most of the principalities in Germany. Why on earth would they have wanted to move back? Well, we know from the talk last week that in Eastern Europe things have gone really bad. There were the Khmelnytsky massacres in 1648, which was really shocking, and things really started to decline in Eastern Europe after these massacres for the Jews. And then, of course, once Poland was split up in 1791, all the way through to till the late 1700s. Poland and Lithuania split up between Russia and Prussia and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, so we don't really have a country, Poland, Lithuania anymore, and things got really horrible for Jews living in the Pale of Settlement. So those were Jews living in the areas of Poland, Lithuania, Belarus, Ukraine, that were owned by Russia, that were in charge, that Russia had. So let's have a look at where, if we look at, oh, I should start the slideshow like this. Hang on a second from the beginning. That's better. Oh, that's you looking at all my screens. If you look at the map of Ashkenazim of today, you can see that this blue area here is areas that are traditionally Ashkenaz. And I know I showed you a map right in the beginning as well of where Ashkenazim are, but you can see the majority of Jews in the world are Ashkenazim. 10 million of around 15 million Jews in the world are Ashkenazim. So that we were mostly here in Eastern Europe, and then Jews gradually shift there and then shift to America, and North America, South America, Australia, and South Africa, and England. All right. So what was happening in the West? Why, what was the attraction with the West? Very important to understand this period of the Enlightenment. So the Enlightenment was a time in history when the whole world sort of woke up. They'd been living in the Middle Ages, then they had gone through the Renaissance, and in the Enlightenment it was the age of reason. It was the age of science. It was the age of trying to understand human intellect and why are we here, human reasoning, scientific exploration, understanding that you need scientific evidence to be able to reason something sometimes. So it was the age of philosophy, science, and understanding. It's when we get the ideas of equality and fraternity and liberty. So this is like a great awakening that's happening in the world in the 17th and 18th century. For the Jews, it really only happens 50 to 100 years after it's generally happened in the West. And these ideas really start in France and in Germany and the Netherlands with Baruch Spinoza in the Netherlands. We've got René Descartes, we've got Voltaire, Rousseau. So there's many people that are involved in starting these ideas. I think, therefore I am, and also in scientific exploration. And what starts to happen with the Enlightenment is people, because they can reason and they can understand things much more, and they understand sort of moral development as well, they start to place religion at a lower level than human understanding. So religion was much more important until now, but religion in the world, I'm not talking about the Jewish people, religion in the world starts to take second place rather than before, when everything was sort of religiously based. Also during this period, we've got the Industrial Revolution happening, and that's really starting to happen in England, and then happens in Europe as well. It spreads over into Eastern Europe. And with the Industrial Revolution, you have urbanization, you've got people moving into cities, you've got many people working now, you've got machines doing everything, and so longevity increases, and you've got these massive population explosions in the world that you just didn't have before, and of course things moving fast. Okay, so that's why we have to squish 200 years, and now we're in a whole new era, the digital and IT era, and we can see how quickly things are really speeding up now, even in the last couple of years. All right, so the Jewish Enlightenment starts, like as I said to you before, 50 to 100 years later, and we know it as the Haskalah. There's a Haskalah in the West, and then later a Haskalah in the East, and they're very different, and we need to understand the West and the East as two completely separate entities, but both of them are really an awakening of reason and new ideas and philosophy. So Haskalah comes from the word like seichel, to think. So that's how you get enlightenment, or in German it's called Aufklärung, and we know it as the Haskalah. So really, who is the father of the Haskalah? For Jewish people, the father of the Haskalah is Moses Mendelssohn, okay, born in 1729 in Dessau in Germany. He was born Moshe ben Menachem Mendel, nice Jewish name. Had a very religious Jewish education. He learned Torah, he learned Talmud. He was highly intelligent, and was recognized by the rabbi of Dessau very early on, Rabbi Frankel, as a genius. And so he sort of took him under his wing. They were very poor. His family were extremely poor. His father was a klopfer, and also a sofer. A klopfer is someone that comes in the morning. This is before you could set your iPhone to alarm, or even before alarm clocks. You needed to wake up for the minyan. and the clock would come around in the morning and like bang on your windows or ring a bell outside your window to get you to wake up to come to the minyan. Okay, so that was what Moses Mendelssohn's dad was, but he was also Sofer, someone who wrote the Torah. And anyway, so he's as a young child, he was 14 when he moved to Berlin, not with his family. He moved with the rabbi of the time, Rabbi Frankel, then accepted a position in Berlin. Now, Berlin is really the seat of the Enlightenment in Germany. It's all happening in Berlin. Unfortunately for Jews, Berlin is not the most friendly place. Berlin only accepts very wealthy Jews. It's got a strata of positions for Jews. So if you're near the bottom, like if you're poor, then most likely you're never going to get to any status there. In fact, you can't even live there for a long time. You can only stay for very temporary periods in Berlin. Lots of anti-Jewish sentiment. People really just didn't understand Jews, like they didn't know what they were. They were very foreign, they looked foreign, they dressed foreign, and they didn't speak German, they were speaking Yiddish. So it was sort of like really the other, and Jews were kept that way. So in the time of the Enlightenment, when you've got sort of the high elite starting to think, you know, of humanism and of equality, people in the elite started to think, well, you know, maybe Jews could also be included in this sort of, you know, in these ideas. But unfortunately, the general population just really is not ready for this at all. And so we'll look at the development of modern anti-Semitism later in the talk. But Moses Mendelssohn lands up, he changes his name to Moses Mendelssohn from Moshe ben Menachem Mendel. He lands up in these salons in Berlin with the intelligentsia of the time, and he learns to speak beautiful German, and he writes beautiful German. He wins a literary competition. He actually beats some famous writers at the time who are writing German literature, and he starts to develop philosophical ideas that really make him quite famous in Germany as a philosopher and part of the Enlightenment, rather than just like as a Jewish philosopher. The Germans consider Moses Mendelssohn as a brilliant philosopher who is German. So yeah, he translates the Tanakh into German. The reason he does this is so that Jews will learn to speak German. It really has nothing to do with the other way. Like, he's not trying to teach non-Jews Tanakh. He's trying to teach Jews proper German. He really did believe that Jews would be included in society if they dressed more like Germans, spoke more like Germans, could communicate more like Germans, were involved in the arts and in literature. He believed that Jews would be accepted if they looked and spoke and thought more like the Gentiles of the era, and because of that, he really puts a lot of effort into trying to encourage Jews to become more German, not give up their Judaism. He himself was a very religious Jew, and certainly keeping halakha, definitely an observant Jew. When people call him the father of reform, he is not the father of reform. He's maybe the father of new ideas that started, that then led to the reform movement, but he's really the father of the Haskalah. He's the father of enlightenment and trying to get Jews accepted by German society. Unfortunately, in his time, emancipation, which means the Jews are sort of now freed. We borrow that word from American slave vocabulary. But once we get emancipation and Jews are freed from their shackles and can emerge and blend into society more, that's called emancipation. He actually never, like, he wants emancipation to happen, but he never realizes emancipation in his life. It happens after his time. He writes many books with a lot of philosophy, and I could do an entire talk for an hour on Moses Mendelssohn. he has some flaws in his philosophy regarding the Torah that then lead to a lot of errors that then come from his thinking. And you can see how people can start at one point and then, you know, reason their way out of Judaism completely by his pattern of thinking. But I can't go into it tonight. If you want me to do another talk at some stage, I'm happy to, but I'll end up speaking the whole time on Moses Mendelssohn. Unfortunately for Mendelssohn, his ideas and his thinking and his philosophy led many followers of him away from Torah, and even his own children landed up converting. Most of his children converted to Christianity, even though he himself was observant. And he really did believe that you could be an observant Jew living in secular society. But his children converted out, and if they didn't convert, he had lots of children. His grandchildren converted out. And the famous composer Mendelssohn Felix Mendelssohn is actually Moses Mendelssohn's grandson, who was not born Jewish. He was born a convert into Christianity. And so, so we can see, unfortunately, that what had actually extremely amazing intentions actually landed up leading Jews down a path towards not just emancipation, but towards losing their Judaism. Okay. So when does emancipation happen? So it's a whole process of things happening. We can see in 1771. So remember, Mendelssohn has died in 1786. In 1771, a man called Christian Wilhelm van Dam, who is actually Mendelssohn's very close friend, writes something on the improvement of Jews as citizens. It looks like maybe a sort of quite a condescending type of document, because why should Jews be improved? But actually, this paper is written to tell people that Jews are people, and Jews should be accepted as human beings. And if you allow them to become citizens, then they will be useful in society, rather than keeping them on the fringe and making them into a separate group that they have become over the centuries because they've been so isolated. So that, you start to get these ideas out. In the 1780s, there's some edicts of toleration that are given in Prussia, because Berlin is in Prussia. And so it's not emancipation, it's not freedom, it's not citizenship, it's not full rights, but it's definitely a step towards that, for sure. And then in 1781, you've got Joseph II of Austria, so he's head of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and he starts to allow Jews into all sorts of professions and trades, and allows Jews into universities. So, of course, Jews weren't allowed into these trades before. We've spoken in the past about Jewish professions, and so Jews start to be able to sort of move out of their forced professions, like money lending, for example. But it all really changes. Everything changes with the French Revolution, because when the French Revolution happened in 1789, Rousseau and Voltaire, they preached these ideas of equality, of fraternity, and of liberty. And of course, if you're going to free every person, and everyone has rights, and everyone should have liberty, and everyone is created equal in the eyes of God, then, well, are Jews then people? So because of the ideas of the French Revolution, look, it actually takes them from 1789 to 1791 to decide that Jews should also be given these rights that everyone else has been given, these ideas of equality and fraternity. So it took 2 years of heavy debate before they decided that Jews actually should be allowed to be citizens and free humans. But but because of that, they sort of couldn't go back on where they were going. They decided that yes, Jews actually are human beings and should be given equality. And that changes everything, because we know that for 10 years, after the sort of reign of terror that happens after the French Revolution, we then get massive expansion with Napoleon, which is going to be my next slide, I think, into the rest of Europe. And so the whole of Western Europe pretty much lands up preaching these ideas of equality and literally tearing down the walls of the ghettos and insisting that Jews get citizenship. In some places, it actually takes nearly 100 years for those ideas to properly take hold. And of course, Napoleon didn't last very long, but he definitely opens up the world, the West, opens up Europe, and starts to get people thinking that Jews can actually be our people and actually can be given rights. So if we look over here, we've got Napoleon Bonaparte. There's a nice picture of him. And he really, Napoleon sees himself as, as someone who's going to free the Jews. He is sort of like has these messianic type visions where he is the liberator of the oppressed people, and he is the liberator of the Jews. Were his intentions totally completely kosher? I don't know, but because of him, really, we do get emancipation of the Jews. So we've got to be thankful for that. You can, whoops, I went the wrong way. You can have a look over here. If you look at his expansion, so he has this French Empire. He becomes emperor. He becomes consul in 1799. He becomes an emperor in 1804, and then he starts embarking on this idea to take over the world as such, or take over Europe, as many people that are trying to start some sort of empire have. And he moves across. You can see that dark blue area is the French Empire, and as he moves across, he takes parts of Germany, he takes Spain. Of course, there's no Jews living in Spain now, so Spain's not going to be emancipated because there's no Jews there. They're still expelled. He doesn't quite get to Britain. He gets that's ultimately his Waterloo. And he does get into Eastern Europe, and eventually, he gets to Russia, and that's where he gets defeated. So you can see, if you look at this map, I'm going to try to move all of you. Whoops, I'm going to try and move us. I've just moved us on the map. Now I'm going to try to move you to a different place. Whoops, you can probably see my eyes moving all over everywhere because I'm now looking. But I want you to look at this other map here, and you can see where emancipation happens and how it happens sort of over those 100 years. So, here you've got France. It's really 1791 is really the date. Maybe a little early in Avignon and Bordeaux. Those are actually, Avignon and Bordeaux were actually areas where you don't really have Ashkenazim. You've got Sephardim, so you've got people that have left after the Spanish Inquisition, come into France as Christians, and then slowly taken up Judaism again. So they were always going to look a little bit more like their neighbors and be able to interact much more with their Christian neighbors, because of course, they were Christian on the outside for some time. They were conversos. So yeah, so they're going to get their emancipation earlier. But the rest of France, certainly Alsace and Lorraine, they get it in 1791 after that decision coming out after the French Revolution. And then here you can see that sort of like darker orange, yellow, like a mustard, I guess, is where where Napoleon goes, and that's where he starts to where emancipation starts to happen. You can see, look, it takes 100 years in Germany after France. Italy is, like 50, 60 years, Switzerland later, and Austro-Hungarian Empire a bit earlier than Germany. And and it does actually get to the east as well, and that's where we get the Eastern Haskalah, and it takes a very different form, as I said to you, earlier. But you can see, the emancipation of Jews is really only happening in 1917 in Russia, because that's when the Russian Revolution is. Once you got the Tsars, there's no chance. And of course, I said to you before, Spain, it doesn't have emancipation until 1930, because there are no Jews there until like the early 1900s. And of course, Great Britain, there's many Jews living very freely there. They don't have rights, and we only really call Great Britain's emancipation once Jews are actually allowed to swear an oath, and it doesn't have to be like a very specific oath when they get inducted into Parliament, as Rothschild did. So that's why we call that date 1890. But Jews were actually quite free in Britain for some time before then, just not citizens. Okay, so I'm going to move this. Yeah, where should I move it? Somewhere here, because then you can see all those pictures. So okay, so we've got the Haskalah. We know the Haskalah is happening. So what are Jews going to do with what's happening with Haskalah? So we've got emancipation happening. We've got Jews leave Judaism in droves. So it starts slowly, and Jews are converting left, right, and center over the 1800s. About 250,000 Jews convert to Christianity in the 1800s freely and of their own will. This is the only time like Ashkenazim converted. We've seen Spanish Jews convert in 1391, and then again all the way through to 1492 in the Spanish Inquisition. But Ashkenazim had always been very resistant to it. The minute that you opened up the doors to the world, Jews left Judaism, and they were leaving in droves. So, as I said before, sometimes you've got these enlightened despots, and they were and intelligentsia who were happy sometimes to give more freedoms to Jews, but the general population took this liberation of Jews badly, and they weren't happy now that Jews were liberated into different professions and different trades. It meant that there was now competition for them. It really bred jealousy, anger, and ultimately violence against Jews. So the Haskalah was good and bad, right? Good in that Jews were given more freedoms, bad in that Jews took their freedoms and converted out, and bad in that it gave rise to even more anti-Semitism than there had been in the past. But good in that Jews eventually got emancipation and free rights, and of course Judaism could, I guess, metamorphosize, but and as it does. So let's look at the different reactions that people have. So you can there was either conversion, apostasy, and you've got Benjamin Disraeli, who we know, a Prime Minister of England. His parents converted so that he could have a better life and he could land up being Prime Minister. You've got Heinrich Heine, very famous convert to Christianity, very famous writer, German writer, and lands up in France. A lot of his statements that he wrote and his sort of self-loathing and self-hate were then used by the Nazis actually as some of their slogans that they used against the Jews. But he basically said baptism was his ticket to the world, his ticket to Europe. And then you've got Karl Marx, who vehemently anti-Jewish, like extremely anti-Jewish. But he himself was a convert, and of course, Karl Marx, father of communism, he writes Das Kapital. We all know about Karl Marx. So some of the other reactions, then we've got the reform movement starting. We've got Abraham Gaga. I'll move it across. So that was Benjamin Disraeli, by the way. And then you've got Abraham Gaga here. This is the picture on the right. He starts reform because he can see all these people converting out. So it's like, okay, everyone's converting out, we need to stop these conversions, so we need to change Judaism. And so he comes up with all the ideas of the liberal movement to stop the conversions out. But in the process, Judaism changes very dramatically under the initial German reform. So reform is, now that we know, is a little bit different from reform that was in Germany, you know, in the early 1800s. They would have, you know, a German Siddur. There's no Hebrew. There's no references to Zan. There's no references, no messianic references. There's shul on a Sunday. There's bells tolling before shul. It looks a whole lot more like church. But reform, of course, metamorphosizes, you know, changes heaps as well over the years. And really what we know now as reform is really reform how it developed in America rather than that initial sort of reform movement that started in Germany. We've got orthodoxy developing as well, the concept of orthodoxy. Because before this, there was not orthodoxy, there was only one thing. You know, maybe there was like in Eastern Europe, there was Hasidism and there was Mitnagdim. And that was like the, you know, like the only choice that you really had. But in Western Europe, there was only one thing. Now you've got reform, and then you've also got the conservative movement developing with Frankel. You've got an Orthodox movement with Bamberg happening. And then you've got the Khatam Sofer. There's a picture of him down at the bottom left. The Khatam Sofer is, he was in Hungary, and basically he said, you've got to reject anything new. Judaism cannot change at all. So build a fence around Judaism completely and totally reject any new ideas. You know, anything new is bad. It's forbidden by the Torah. Anything chadash, anything new is forbidden by the Torah. You must keep your same dress. You must keep your same, you know, ideas, clothing, thoughts. Don't let anything interfere with Judaism at all. So that, you know, that's the other extreme. And of course he has still many followers, many followers. But for the people that were living in Germany that were already converting out in droves, that sort of idea didn't necessarily take hold. And then you've got Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, who is really the father of modern Orthodoxy, who is living in Germany and can basically see what's happening. And he is like, no, you have to be, a halakha is like not negotiable. You've got to keep a halakha, but you can dress like the other people as long as you're wearing a kippah. And you're dressing modestly, but you can go to university as long as you're also learning Torah. So all the ideas of modern Orthodoxy that we know today, where you can dress like the rest of the population as long as it's in sort of a modest way, and you don't have to stand out too much, but you have to adhere to certain halakhas or all the halakhas. You have to like distinguish between what's custom and what's halakha. You need to follow that to keep Judaism alive as Judaism and not as a completely different religion. So again, we could talk about all these people for a very long time, but I'm going to move on. So people are right. So many different reactions, and let me read this one here. So now with the Haskalah, and now with Enlightenment, and now with emancipation, we've got the rise of not only the court Jew, who was in Germany, many princes, many dukes had and noblemen had Jews working for them. They were called court Jews, and they were sort of organizing finances and organizing commercial comings and goings. You also have the rise of large, big banking families like the Rothschilds. So, you've got Mayer Amschel Rothschild, who's the first Rothschild, who starts this entire dynasty because his children all then follow what he does, and he starts this massive, big banking network all around Europe. Of course, this has come after the 30 Years' War, which we could talk about again for a whole talk, but we're not going to. The 30 Years' War changes everything because it's a war between Catholics and Protestants in Europe. And of course, they need the kings and the dukes and whoever are in charge of all the different principalities that are at war with each other. No one wins the war, by the way. They need finance, and they need credit, and they need weapons, and they need food. And the Jews actually are very involved in organizing the credit and the weapons and that sort of thing, so that the dukes can finance their armies, and princes and kings can finance their armies. So all of this, so this sort of dynasty, this Rothschild dynasty that comes along, then follows after the 30 Years' War. And I mean, Rothschild is really, you know, I guess where every Jew would have liked to see themselves getting to such a high sort of financial and respected position. Any Jew in the Haskalah, obviously, if you're living in Lithuania or in Poland, you might not have even known, you know, too much about the Rothschilds, but certainly Jews living in the Enlightenment would have aspired possibly to be like the Rothschilds. They, of course, didn't convert, certainly not early on, and they were observant Jews, but they were very much living in the public eye. But now, you know, I was looking for pictures of the Rothschilds online to see, you know, if I could find some good pictures to show you. And as I type in Rothschild, all these awful anti-Semitic pictures and anti-Semitic info starts like piling up on my screen. And I realized, you know, how much anti-Semitism you know, there is when it comes to sort of the ideas of domination of world order and Jews taking over the world and Jews financing the world. And really, unfortunately for anti-Semites, they take the word Rothschild and make that into synonymous with Jews taking over the world, which of course is absolutely, you know, not true at all. So now we need to talk about modern anti-Semitism, because this really, this is very important to understand if we're going to talk sometime about the Holocaust later, and even, you know, anything leading up to the Holocaust. We need to understand the development of modern anti-Semitism. We're still living in an era of modern anti-Semitism. It's taken some new shapes with the development of the State of Israel, but certainly modern anti-Semitism is developing all the time from the time of the Haskalah, okay, from the time of the Enlightenment. And the word anti-Semitism, because we didn't have a word called anti-Semitism before, is coined by William Marr in 1881. Like, what does it really mean? The thing is that anti-Semitism has been around from the dawn of time, but it took different forms, and we've discussed medieval anti-Semitism in depth, where it took the form of sort of blood libels and desecration of the host and Judenstau, those sort of ideas of Jews sort of being evil and Jews being sort of devilish. And of course, religion was very important in medieval times, but once you get to the Enlightenment period, people are chucking ideas of religion. So it's all going to be now about science and finance, okay? Because now capitalism is around, people are making money, people are aware of money, people are aware that Jews are involved in business. And so it takes modern anti-Semitism takes two forms. The first form is the scientific one, right? Because if science is everything, well, then you can look at Jewish facial features, you could look at Jewish body types, you could look, you know, you can try and do all those things, and you can try and piece together how Jews should look. And unfortunately, you've got these anti-Semitic caricatures that are coming out where obviously certain characteristics of Jews are overemphasized. Of course, not every Jew has got a large nose. Of course, not every Jew has got, you know, large jowls or droopy eyes. I mean, of course not. But the anti-Semitic caricatures really pick on this and draw people's attention to it. If you have a look, this is these are Nazi anti-Semitic caricatures here. You've got one which is the poisonous mushroom, how you've got, you know, how Jews are like a poison and they look evil and they are evil and they're going to poison the world. It's always how Jews are going to destroy destroy the world and how Jews are going to destroy things. You've got over there, you know, like Jews have got a nose shaped like a 6. This is one of the Second World War Holocaust caricatures here, where they're trying to show racial characteristics. Then you've got the idea of the Jews taking over the world. And so when you look at these pictures here, the idea is like when I was telling you about the Rothschild cartoons that I've seen, where you've got, you know, Jews financing the world, or Jews causing changes in world order. You've got the protocols of the Elders of Zion developing, and you know, here's a French one, the Jewish peril. We've got, you know, this spider encapsulating the world, or here there's an octopus, you know, enveloping its tentacles around around people. You know, just in case you're mistaking, it's a Jewish octopus. It does have, you know, like a doorbell on it. And here's Facebook, of course, taking over the world with Zuckerberg. And there's a caricature, there's a little caricature here. You can see this you know, grub. This is one where, like, it's showing that Jews are not even human. They're definitely a parasite on society, and they are taking over the world as well as a parasite. This is a large, disgusting looking parasite about to take over the world. So this is how anti-Semitism really starts to develop, and has giant implications. And of course, it's all in the name of science and reason. So now we're going to talk about the Haskalah in the East. And if you have a look at this picture, this is like the Fiddler on the Roof Tevye picture, because we spoke a lot about the East last week, and the Haskalah in the East takes a very different form, because you don't have all these ideas in coming from the West, where you also have, you know, people who are happy to have Jews in university and discuss things, and salons where they're discussing Jews. You just don't have that. You've got Jews living in the palace settlement in the poorest of conditions, where they really have no freedoms at all. So that's the first problem. And secondly, because the Jews in Russia don't really have any relationship with the nobility in Russia, the only relationships that they have are really with the peasants, and Jews never wanted to be like the peasants. So whereas Jews always had this attraction to Germany, where they wanted to be like Germans, they never really wanted to be involved in Russian society much. And so instead of these ideas developing where people want to convert to be like the rest of the population and become like more German, you have people sticking with their Judaism, but they're losing their religion. So that it will be like a cultural revolution. The development of the secular Jew really happens at this point, where you can be Jewish in culture, and you can be very, like, you know, you can be very traditional, but you're like not going to keep any of your any halacha. And so you get Yiddish developing, the ideas of socialism develop at this point, because in Russia it's also going to lead more to concepts of revolution and communism and socialism, rather than a conversion out. Also, ideas developing Zionism really takes hold at this point, and so you've got these like sort of like little mini Haskalahs sort of happening all around in Eastern Europe, where new ideas are coming along, and people are embracing different sort of cultural things. Of course, there was opposition to the Haskalah movement. The Hasidic movement absolutely opposed it. In fact, when Napoleon was coming into Russia, you've got Rabbi Ashkenazic of Liadi, of Chabad, saying, you know, rather support the Russian Tsar than support Napoleon, because at least under the Russian Tsar, we're all going to remain Jewish. But if Napoleon comes in here, like, that's the end of Judaism for us, because he was understanding what was happening in the West. And of course, the Vilna Gaon and the Mitnadim and the Yeshiva movement, of course, was absolutely opposed to these ideas of the Haskalah. so yeah, we have the idea of the secular Jew being created in the East. Okay, so now we need to talk about anti-Semitism in Russia, because this forces the Jews to move west. We have giant waves of people moving in the 1880s over to America, over to Germany, over to France, South Africa, Australia, England. Huge waves, which we're going to talk about in a moment, just to understand what it was like living in the Pale of settlement under Russia in the 1800s and the 1900s. People were living with pogroms, and there were massive pogroms in Kishinev, massive pogroms in Odessa, that really drove Jews to think, we can't live here anymore. It's like Lithuania, Poland, Ukraine, have just become too difficult to live in. And Russians actually encouraged Jews to leave. The Russian government didn't want Jews there. So as soon as America opened its doors, they were like, yes, go, you can leave. They didn't try and stop Jews from leaving. They didn't want the Jews there. They were not happy to have the Jews there in the first place. The Pale, when they suddenly inherited 1.5 million Jews that they didn't want. And of course, the other thing that causes Jews to leave are the cantonist laws, which are completely shocking. The cantonist into the army for a number of years in the beginning, and then another 25 years after then. And once they finished in the Russian army, if they'd even survived being in the Russian army, they were certainly not Jewish anymore. And so many Jews got conscripted and left when they were conscripted. My own great-grandfather was one of those. He was living in Lithuania, and he got conscription papers, and that was it for him. He made it to South Africa straight after then. Otherwise, he would have been in the Russian army and wouldn't have been here. So yeah, so you do have Jews leaving in droves. Huge anti-Semitism in the era, and you have the development, of course, of communism and of revolutionaries as well. And Jews are involved in that, but not on a large scale. When you think Jews were involved on a large scale, that's because anti-Semitic literature is telling you that Jews were involved on a large scale. In communism. They actually weren't. It was a few, but they were quite prominent in the movement. So, but in general, Jews were not communists. It didn't help them to be communists, and the communists were as anti-Semitic as before. Okay, so now let's have a look over here at a return to Zion, because Jews needed to move. And Israel was one of the places that they could go to. So you've got these groups going, first Aliyah, Chodavei Zion or Chibat Zion, and then Bilu, which is Beit Yaakov, Lechud and Alcha. So you've got these groups that are going to farm the land to, of course, Israel's not a state, it's the Ottoman Empire, it's a swamp and a desert, there's nothing there. But this development of the Zionist movement that had come out from the Ashkenazic in the East, where they felt that young Jews were feeling like, well, if we're going to move, we need to move to the land of Israel. We need to go and develop the land. We need to go and farm it and create a state. But initially, there was no concept of a state. It was just to go and develop the land and to live there in not in safety. It was very difficult. With many Jews often came back because it was just so difficult to live there. It was dangerous, and of course there was malaria, and the living conditions were shocking. But about 25 to 35,000 Jews from 1881, which is when those awful pogroms were in Kishinev and Odessa. No, actually, Odessa was Kishinev was 1903. Odessa happened a little bit earlier. But from the Jews moving from Eastern Europe to Western Europe, and certainly to Israel happening in the 1880s. About 25 to 35,000 Jews going to Israel. It was all about agriculture, and these names still, like when you go and visit these places in Israel, they're still very much there. Rosh Pinah, Rishon LeZion, Zichron Yaakov, you can go and see them today. But this is where the early pioneers started off and built the land into the land that it would become. So we need to discuss political Zionism now, and I know that I don't have too long, so I'm aware of this and skipping out tons of what I was going to talk to you about. But we need to talk a little bit about Theodor Herzl, because we all know Theodor Herzl is the man that came up with the idea of the Jewish state. So not just the land of Israel, but the state of Israel. He didn't initially care if it was in Israel or if it was in Uganda or it was anywhere. But how did Theodor Herzl come up with this idea? So he was a secular Jew, like he hadn't converted, but he was completely secular. Okay, his children did not even get a bris. Okay, so he was a journalist, a really good journalist, living in the Austro-Hungarian Empire and then in Germany as a journalist, and knowing that he is Jewish but didn't really care about Judaism. His wife, we think, was Jewish, but we're not totally sure that she was, and really didn't think too much about Judaism until a very particular event happened. The Dreyfus trial happened in 1894 in France. Now, the French Jews were more French than Jewish. Okay, so in the 1890s, how is this for a fact? In the 1890s, there were only about 500 Jews in France that were considered Orthodox, who would have called themselves Orthodox. The rest were all Reform. Yeah, or sort of like nothing, and they were very French. So they felt like they're born Jewish, but they're French. And Theodor Herzl would have thought that there was an anti-Semitism there, because of course the Jews had blended in, and this was really imagined. Jews had full rights. They were in the army. Alfred Dreyfus, of course, was in the army. He was a lieutenant in the army, and suddenly what happens? I mean, there was a lot of developing modern anti-Semitism there with a man called Edward Durant. Edward Durant is making this. He wrote a book, and then of course he's got this newspaper that's going. And in 1886, Edward Durant makes this book, this anti-Semitic book, which then becomes a bestseller in France. It's called La France Juive. So, yep, and it's all about how Jews are going to take over the world and run a Christian life. That he talks about crucifying Christianity. Anyway, Dreyfus is happily in the army at this stage, and he gets accused of, there had been the Franco-Prussian War. Of course, the French lost the Franco-Prussian War. They were very embarrassed by this. And from their loss, this guy, Edward Durant, he accuses Alfred Dreyfus of selling out to the Germans. And he says, this is why you lost the war, because he gave all the information to the Germans. And he gets accused of this. This is a treasonous act, and he gets life imprisonment. And Theodor Herzl is one of the people that's covering this as a journalist, and he doesn't really initially care too much about Alfred Dreyfus, but he doesn't see people going, death to Alfred Dreyfus. Alfred Dreyfus is a terrible man. He sees in the streets people are shouting, death to the Jews, death to the Jews. And he sees this terrible anti-Semitism that's happening in a place where there shouldn't be anti-Semitism if Jews are so well integrated. And he realizes there's like an aha moment that Jews have to live in a state. Jews have to have somewhere that they can go. Because if you can be completely integrated and people will still hate you, then there needs to be a Jewish state. And he writes this book called the Judenstaat and the Jewish State. He imagines the capital will be like, you know, Berlin, and the people will be speaking high German, and they'll be dressing, you know, in top hats and tail, and not like what was really happening on the ground. But yeah, that's how he imagines the Jewish state. But anyway, he starts this this whole concept of Zionism, and we know what follows afterwards. In Basel, he gets everyone together as this first Zionist conference, and he has, in 1897, in Basel, he says, if you will it, it's no dream. And he tells everyone that in 50 years' time, there will be a Jewish state, which, of course, people thought was like the biggest joke. How on earth could there be a Jewish state in 50 years' time? And Dhaka, in 50 years' time, there was a Jewish state. Eretz Israel becomes, Medinat Israel becomes the state of Israel in 1948. So it's incredible what he started and where he came from to where he then lands up as the father of political Zionism. So yeah, so let's talk about then very briefly. If you didn't go to Israel, where did you go? Here's a map showing where you could have gone. So this is everyone coming out of Eastern Europe in the late 1800s. You've got about 2 million going to America, 70,000 going to Canada, 111,000 going to South America, to Brazil and Argentina mostly, 5,000 going to Australia, 45,000 going to South Africa. So, and 45,000 going to Israel. See, that's a different number, right? I told you 25 to 35,000, depends on the map, but and the source of it. But so Jews leave in droves. We know, of course, there's going to be 6 million Jews killed in the Shoah, and they are going to be all, mostly from Eastern Europe, but of course from Western Europe as well, from Germany, from France, Greece, Yugoslavia, all of those areas. A lot of Jews, 6 million Jews are killed in the Holocaust. But the rest managed to leave, and the ones that don't, that are left behind, of course, have to face the Holocaust. And I would love to, at some stage, if you want, I'm happy to talk about the Holocaust. Tonight we only have a couple of minutes left, but unfortunately 6 million Jews who cannot leave or don't want to leave Eastern Europe, but by the time are murdered in the Shoah. And certainly, stop sharing that. I've had the screen on like the entire time. You know, Jews couldn't leave at a point, and even if they wanted to, Jews had become very poor between the wars, and it's a whole other history in itself. But thank goodness for those late 1800s that got Jews out of Eastern Europe, because if they hadn't, many more Jews would have been killed in the Holocaust. And so, you know, you sometimes wonder why things happen, why there were those terrible Cantonist laws, or why there were those awful pogroms, or why life was so bad in the Palace settlement. But you know, and then you realize like these things happen for maybe a reason, and maybe that was, you know, Hashem's design was to get most of the Jews out of Europe, so that Jews would make a diaspora everywhere in the world, and be able to keep Ashkenazim and to keep Sephardim and Jews safe in other parts of the world. So it's awful that we dispersed, but it does keep us safe in certain places when it's not safe in others. So I hope that over the last 3 weeks I've really enjoyed speaking to you all. I hope I've given you a good idea about Ashkenazi Jewish history, about, you know, our journeys, where we started, where we went back to, and then, you know, ultimately where we landed up. And I hope that gives you an idea to understand where we are now. If you understand your past, you have a much clearer idea of the present, and a much greater understanding if you understand history. So I hope I gave you enough information. As I said before, like each one of these talks could have literally been an hour on each of those pages, but yeah, we limited the time. Does anyone have any questions?
If you have any questions, please unmute yourself if you want to ask a question of Bev.
No question.
Okay, so it seems that there aren't questions. You've covered it all, Bev. I just want to once again thank you so much.
I think I overwhelmed people with information.
Are there any questions? No, I don't think so. So again, Bev, I just want to thank you. And I'm sure on behalf of all the people that joined in this week and the previous 2 weeks, you have given us such a beautiful taste of the past. As you've said, it's not easy to condense so much Jewish history into 3 hours, but you've given a beautiful summary, a concise history. And thank you so much for the invitation for future talks. I know I'm going to be bombarded with requests to take you up on that invitation. So please God, we look forward to that. But in the meantime, thank you. Stay safe. Please God, Melbourne should continue on the right direction with COVID-19. And please God, not go into any further restrictions. And once again, thank you so much for being so gracious, for being so giving of your time, your knowledge, your passion. It's really come to the fore and we are so appreciative. Thank you so much.
It's an absolute pleasure. I enjoyed speaking to all of you. So yeah, absolute pleasure, and keep safe there as well.
Thank you.
Well done, Bev. It was wonderful. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Well done, Rodney. Well done.
Thank you.
Well done. Thank you.
Thank you so much for
Thank you.
listening.
Yeah.